Chloe had always been the type to save birthday cards and wrap presents with satin ribbon, even when there was no one else to receive them. Since retiring from the public library and becoming a widow, her life had become a predictable sequence of quiet mornings, chamomile tea at 4 o'clock, and crossword puzzles written in pencil. She lived in a modest house on the outskirts of Portland, surrounded by neighbors who waved but did not talk. The days passed slowly, as if waiting for something. That never came, and then, on a rainy Wednesday in April, the phone rang. It was Evan, her only son. His voice was urgent and weary. "Mom, could you come over for a few days? We're at our wits' end here with Simon." Chloe didn't hesitate. The call felt like a summons to something bigger than herself, a chance to be useful again, to be seen, to be part of it. In the days that followed, Chloe occupied herself with an energy she hadn't felt in a long time. She washed and ironed her best clothes, set aside a notebook to write down feeding times, and researched newborn care tips online. She made a point of choosing gifts one by one: a handmade blanket, cloth books, and an unscented moisturizer for Simon's delicate skin. She even bought a lavender diffuser to help Lara sleep better, she thought. As she boarded the train to her son's city, her heart raced not only for her grandson, but for everything she could relive. The family lunches, the late-night conversations, the laughter between generations. She carried hope in her bags, and in her hands, a package of apple fritters that Evan had loved since he was a child. She thought that this time she would have a place to stay that wasn't temporary. Before continuing, take the opportunity to subscribe to the channel. Here, you will find stories like Chloe's, real, moving, and that make us think about life in a different way. The reception, however, was not what Chloe had dreamed. Evan was clearly exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a milk-stained t-shirt, but he was attentive. Lara, on the other hand, didn't even crack a smile when she opened the door. Her eyes passed over Chloe as if she were a late package. "He just fell asleep. He's just not talking loudly," she said, before even saying hi. Chloe tried to ignore the tension. She reached out for a hug, but was patted on the shoulder. She walked in with her bags in hand and a heavy heart. The house was beautiful, modern, full of new toys, but devoid of warmth. "We left the living room couch for you. There's a clean sheet in the hall closet," Lara said, already turning her back. Chloe smiled awkwardly, thanked her quietly, and placed the apple fritters on the counter, waiting for some reaction. Nothing. She sat down for a moment but was soon called. "Oh, the diaper pail needs to be emptied. It's in his room." And so it began. In the early hours, Chloe struggled to find beauty in the details. The smell of her grandson, the sound of his soft breathing as he slept, the tiny touch of his fingers gripping hers. But what was supposed to be a loving visit soon became a routine of obligations. She took care of feedings, changing babies, washing tiny clothes, and even cleaning the breast pump. She tried to start conversations with Lara over breakfast, but received only absent-minded nods or dry responses. On the third day, she offered to cook something special, but Lara told her, "I'd rather watch my salt than my blood pressure." At night, she lay on the thin couch, her body aching, the constant sound of the baby crying, while mosquitoes bit her ankles. Still, she woke up smiling at Simon's first grumble, hoping that someone would say a simple "thank you" that day. On the fourth day, something inside Chloe began to change. It wasn't a snap, but a subtle sensation, like an invisible crack growing silently. She was in the kitchen, washing bottles for the fourth time, when she heard Lara complain from the bedroom. "This water is too cold, Chloe. Will it make the baby sick?" Her voice was filled with judgment, as if she had done something unforgivable. Chloe responded with a "Sorry, I'll change it," but felt her face heat up and her chest tighten. She began to wonder when she had stopped being a mother and become a maid. She also began to wonder where the son who used to lie on her lap and tell her that she was the best part of his world was. Evan now barely looked her in the eye. always busy, always avoiding conflict. With each passing day, Chloe felt that her presence there was not wanted, it was merely tolerated. The next day, after putting Simon in his crib after a sleepless night, Chloe went out onto the balcony to get some fresh air. The air was hot and stuffy, and she decided to turn on the air conditioning in the baby's room, as he was already sweating slightly on his neck. Less than 5 minutes later, Lara appeared furious. "Did you turn on the air conditioning? He's going to catch a cold. You never ask questions." The scolding fell like a bucket of ice water. Chloe tried to explain, to say that it was just to cool off the heat, but Lara had already left the room. That afternoon, Chloe ate a dry sandwich and a half-ripe apple by herself. No one asked if everything was okay. When Evan came home from work and saw his mother sitting in the living room in silence, he simply said, "Lara's stressed. Try to understand," and went to take a shower. Chloe looked at the picture frame on the shelf, an old photo of Evan as a baby in her arms, and felt something break. That night, Chloe couldn't sleep. She tossed and turned on the narrow couch, the muffled sound of the TV in the next room accompanying the buzzing of mosquitoes. The sheets were slipping, the pillow was too shallow, and the pain in her back seemed to have a voice of its own. But what hurt the most was the silence. Not the silence of the house, that was filled with cries, commands, and slamming doors, but the silence coming from Evan. He saw what was happening, saw his mother struggling, but he chose the most comfortable path, not to take a stand. At dawn, before anyone was even awake, Chloe got up, made coffee, and washed the dishes from the night before. Then she sat down with a notebook in her hand and began to do the math. For the first time in years, she wrote down how much she had been sending each month to help pay Evan's bills. $3,000, month after month. Money that paid the mortgage, the insurance, sometimes even the groceries. At breakfast, she tried to talk to Evan. She said it might be best to come home at the end of the week. He frowned. "But you just got here, Mom. We still need you." Chloe took a deep breath. It wasn't the answer she was expecting. She wanted to hear something like, "I understand," or "You've done a lot." But the need was too much. It was as if her presence was a function, not a choice. Lara in the background heard and said sharply, "If she wants to go, she will. We'll manage." Evan gave her an uncomfortable look but said nothing. And so in the middle of breakfast, Chloe knew. She was alone in that house, even surrounded by people. That afternoon, she went into the baby's room and rocked Simon in her arms. He slept peacefully, unaware of anything. She looked at him for minutes, in silence, and felt the need to protect herself, for his sake, but mostly for herself. The next day, Chloe woke up before sunrise. She had already decided she would go home that same afternoon. She didn't tell anyone right away. She spent the morning taking care of Simon with the same affection as always, but with a different look, a look of farewell. She wrapped the blanket she had bought, folding it carefully as if it were an unwritten note. She sorted her few belongings, washed and put away what she had used, and even cleaned the crumbs from the counter. Around 11 o'clock, she called Evan to talk. They sat in the backyard, each with a cup of coffee. She spoke calmly, without resentment, just the truth. She was tired, hurt, and needed to get back to herself. Evan tried to interrupt a few times, saying that it was a phase, that Lara was going through a difficult postpartum period. But Chloe wasn't there to understand Lara. She was there to see herself, after so long disappearing into other people's lives. When she mentioned that she would also stop financial aid, Evan paled. "But, Mom, we count on this money, the house." Chloe nodded. "I know, but you're a grown man, and if there's one thing this time has taught me, it's that love can't be used as a bargaining chip." The conversation ended without shouting, but with an irreversible distance. When she went to say goodbye to Lara, she received a curt bon voyage, accompanied by a look that mixed relief and contempt. No one drove her to the station. Chloe went alone, pulling her small suitcase along the hot sidewalk. Inside the bag was one of the cloth books that Simon hadn't used. Yet he couldn't leave it. On the train, sitting next to the window, she didn't cry. She just watched the landscape change, as if the world outside was starting to spin on its axis again. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel guilty for choosing herself. If you feel like this story could be yours or someone you know, leave a like below. It really helps us to keep telling stories like this. In the days that followed, Chloe relearned how to live in her own silence. The house, which had previously seemed too big for just one person, now offered her space to breathe. She started with simple gestures. She opened the windows early in the morning, moved the furniture around, and took down the photos that no longer represented what she felt. On Monday, she went to the community center in her neighborhood and signed up for a gardening course, something she had always wanted to do but had put off. She bought a new notebook to write down what she learned, and she started going to the local farmer's market again, where she discovered the pleasure of picking her own herbs. Little by little, her body felt less tense, her shoulders less hunched, and most importantly, she began to sleep better. It was as if the invisible weight she had been carrying for years had finally been lifted. Evan's messages came in short bursts. First, a simple, "Let me know when you're here." Then, a few quick audio messages, apologizing in a vague way, full of justifications. Chloe responded politely, but without giving her space. She knew that if she didn't keep her cool, she would start to lose her temper again. Lara, on the other hand, remained silent until a screenshot arrived by mistake in the local community group. A rant in which she called her mother-in-law selfish and unstable, insinuating that Chloe had abandoned her grandson out of pride. The post didn't mention names, but those who knew her knew. When Chloe saw it, she felt a lump in her throat, not from anger, but from sadness. She didn't expect gratitude, but she also didn't expect defamation. For a moment, she thought about responding, but she didn't. Instead, she went to the porch, grabbed the new watering can she had bought in gardening class, and tended to her first rosemary and lavender seedlings. It was what was within her reach at that moment, to cultivate what was hers, and hers alone. That same week, Chloe decided to do something symbolic. She went to the bank, ended the automatic transfer of her monthly allowance, and made it clear to the manager that no more payments would be made without her direct consent. She felt an almost physical relief when she signed the papers. It wasn't about the money itself, it was about control. For the first time in years, she was taking control of her own life. After the bank, she stopped at a stationery store and bought a pretty navy blue planner. She decided to fill the pages with plans that were just for her: museum visits, Pilates classes, walks in, the park, and afternoons of doing nothing. When she got home, she put on an old song on the radio and danced alone in the living room, laughing at herself when she tripped on the rug. This wasn't loneliness, it was freedom. And it was in this new routine, made up of small rituals and conscious choices, that the phone rang loudly again. It was Evan in a panic. Simon was hospitalized with a severe respiratory infection and Lara was collapsing. "Mom, I don't know what to do. We need you," he said, his voice shaking. Chloe listened to everything in silence. The pain in her son's voice pierced her, but it no longer confused her. She knew it wasn't her responsibility to save everyone. Even so, she calmly replied, "I'm going." She packed a change of clothes, took her subway card, and left without making a fuss. When she arrived at the hospital, she found Evan haggard from exhaustion and Simon with a red face, surrounded by wires and monitors. She picked up her grandson, talked to the doctors, and offered her son a snack. She did everything a mother would do, but without forgetting who she was now. She was there by choice, not by obligation. The days at the hospital were intense, but unlike anything Chloe had experienced at home, there were no silent diapers to change or veiled orders. There was urgency, fear, humanity. She took turns with the nurses, chatted with other mothers in the waiting room, and whenever she could, she sat next to Simon's incubator, telling stories. softly, as if each word could ease his fever. Evan was more present, more vulnerable. On one of those early mornings, as they shared a weak coffee and cold sandwiches from the vending machine, he looked at his mother with teary eyes and said, "I failed you, didn't I?" Chloe, who had longed to hear something like that, simply replied, "You were the one you managed to be. Now you just have to learn to be better." And for the first time in a long time, there was no weight in that exchange, only truth. On the third day of her hospitalization, Lara showed up. She was dejected, her face pale and her eyes lost. She stood silently at the door of the room for a few minutes, watching Chloe rock Simon in her arms. Then she slowly approached and held out an envelope. "It's an email I wrote, but I thought it would be better to give it to you in print. I don't want you to think it was just for convenience." Chloe took the envelope but didn't open it right away. She put it in her bag and continued to care for her grandson, as if she had learned that some things need time and others distance. Later, she read the letter while sitting in the cafeteria. It was 3 pages of apologies, confessions, and regrets. Lara spoke of exhaustion, pressure, and the difficulty of dealing with the presence of someone who reminded her how inadequate she felt as a mother. Chloe read it to the end, folded it carefully, and put it away again. There was no anger in her eyes, but there was also no rush to start over. When Simon was discharged, Chloe walked them to the car but didn't get in. Evan insisted that she come back with them, saying that things would be different, that she understood now. She smiled, thanked him, but firmly refused. "I'm going home, my home." The sentence sounded simple, but it carried all the weight of a decision that had been built brick by brick over the last few days. Evan hesitated, visibly uncomfortable, but nodded. Lara, more restrained, simply said, "Thank you." Chloe waved at her grandson, still sleeping in his car seat, and turned away with calm steps. She went back to the subway, caught the train, and that same day she was back to her routine. Plants, chamomile tea, notebook. But now there was something new in that routine, a sense of autonomy that she had never felt so strongly. For the first time, she wasn't coming home hurt. She was coming home whole. The following days were filled with silence, but a good silence. Not the silence of exclusion, but the silence of choice. Chloe resumed her gardening lessons, attended a reading meeting at the community center, and even accepted a neighbor's invitation to watch an old movie at home. She avoided social media, but learned from a friend that Lara's mean post had been deleted. She also noticed that Evan now wrote short but more respectful messages. He didn't ask or demand anything. He would just say, "Hi, Mom, how are you?" And that was enough. She didn't want to break up for good, but she also didn't want to go back to the same old place. Now every contact was filtered by what she herself decided to feel. It wasn't about revenge, nor about teaching lessons. It was about living with dignity. Chloe discovered that love, when well cared for, doesn't need to be sacrificed to exist. And that, for her, was a new beginning enough. Over time, small changes began to take place in Chloe's life. She bought a new, more modern cell phone and learned how to use video calls to talk to a distant cousin who lived in rural Arizona. She started cooking recipes she'd seen on TV shows and even signed up for a pottery class in a nearby town. It wasn't about filling her time. It was about experiencing the joy of choosing for herself. And in those choices, something inside her reconnected with a dormant youth. One day, as she passed a clothing store, she went in and bought an olive green dress she never would have chosen before. "It's just your style," the saleswoman said. Chloe laughed and replied, I think I'm just figuring out what my style is now." Even so, there were difficult days. Days when she missed him too much, or when she wondered if she had done too much or too little. Days when she looked at her cell phone waiting for a call that never came, or when she looked at the photo of Simon in the hospital and felt a tightness in her chest. But now she knew how to deal with these moments without losing herself. She wrote down what she felt, went for a longer walk, or made a cake for her neighbors. She didn't deny her pain, but she didn't wallow in it either. She understood that living with dignity didn't mean always being well, but refusing to stay in places that diminished her. When she thought about Evan and Lara, she no longer felt anger. She felt a certain regret, but also acceptance. She knew that each person only gives what they have, and that for a long time she had given even what she didn't have. Now it was time to take some of that back. It was a random Saturday when Chloe received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a recent photo of Simon, now a little older, wearing a yellow jumpsuit and smiling, with two little words handwritten on the back, "Missing you." She held the picture for a few minutes, not knowing what to feel. It was a small gesture, but full of meaning. There was no signature, but she knew it had come from Evan. She put the photo in her diary, right between the pages that marked her upcoming appointments. She didn't reply. It wasn't pride, it was respect. Respect for herself. She understood that gestures don't erase wounds, but they can point the way, and now she wouldn't accept just any path, only those that allowed her to walk upright with the firm step of someone who knows herself. The following week, on a cloudy afternoon, she went to visit her husband's grave, something she had avoided for months. She brought fresh flowers and sat in silence for a while. She spoke quietly about everything she was going through, as if she needed to summarize it for someone who had always seen the truth in her. She told him about Simon, about the trip, about the boundaries she had learned to draw. She said she missed having a hand to hold, but that now she knew how to walk on her own. When she got up to leave, she realized she felt lighter, not because she had let go of the past, but because she had finally stopped trying to carry everyone's present on her shoulders. On the way home, she stopped at a new coffee shop, ordered a hot chocolate, and watched the people walking by on the sidewalk. She thought about how, for so many years, she had forgotten about herself. But now, every simple choice, having a coffee, saying no, taking care of the plants, was a way of reminding herself that she was still alive, and more than that she was okay. Over time, Chloe realized she was rediscovering her own voice, not the one she used to please, ask permission, or avoid conflict, but one that came from within, confident and unafraid to be heard. In one of her ceramics classes, she shared part of her story with a younger classmate who was visibly moved. "You should write a book," she said. Chloe laughed, shaking her head. "I guess for now, I'm just writing my life again." That conversation echoed for days, not because of the suggestion itself, but because of the idea that her journey, marked by silences and excessive giving, had value, that what she experienced could help other people recognize and respect themselves. It was then that she decided to start writing letters, not to send but to herself. She bought beautiful stationery with watercolor flowers, and every Sunday she set aside an hour just for this. She wrote as if she were talking to a younger version of herself, or to that tired woman who, years before, slept on a mosquito-bitten couch, trying to be accepted. In one of the letters, she wrote, "You are not bad for choosing yourself. You are not ungrateful for walking away. You are just remembering that you are human too." These letters accumulated in a small wooden box that stood on the shelf next to the plants. Sometimes she would reread some of them. Other times, she would leave them there simply as a testimony of everything that could no longer be swallowed. It was a way of listening to herself without censorship, of accepting herself without depending on the validation of others. A new kind of intimacy with herself. On a cold afternoon, Chloe received a call from an unknown number. She answered with some hesitation, and on the other end was Lara. The voice was different, calmer, almost shy. "I just wanted to say thank you for your help at the hospital, and I really apologize." Chloe took a deep breath. There was a time when she had been waiting anxiously for that request, but now it was no longer about hearing apologies. It was about what she would do with them. She answered politely, saying she accepted, but in no rush to start any new relationship. Lara spoke a little more sincerely, and before hanging up, she asked if she could send photos of Simon from time to time. Chloe said yes, but asked for a favor. that those photos not be an obligation, but rather a gesture of real affection. If it's meant to be, I'll accept it with love. From then on, the messages began to arrive with more space, less weight. A photo of Simon crawling, a video of him laughing, a Christmas message with heartfelt wishes. Chloe watched and smiled, but without the urge to catch a train the next day. She now understood that she could love from a distance without putting herself in second place. This realization freed her. Instead of filling voids with compulsive help, she now filled her life with presence, her own. One day, looking at one of the photos of her grandson, she smiled and murmured, "He will grow up, and he will know who I am. When the time comes, he will feel it." And she went back to reading, the cup of tea still warm in her hand, in no hurry for anything more to happen than what already was, peace. Because finally, after so many years, Chloe's life was hers. One morning, while watering her plants, Chloe received a visit from Julia, her upstairs neighbor, a middle-aged woman with curly hair always tied back in a messy bun, and a way of speaking that mixed excitement with affection. "I'm organizing a book club. Nothing serious, just a few women wanting to chat and have coffee. Are you up for it?" Chloe hesitated for a second, but then said yes. It seemed small, but it was huge. It was an invitation to belong, not to serve. The following week, she brought a lemon cake and a worn copy of The Elegance of the Hedgehog. She sat among strangers and for the first time in a long time talked about books, feelings, and even her own experiences without having to justify or apologize for having distanced herself from her own family. The group became part of her routine. They met every 2 weeks, always in a different house. There, Chloe allowed herself to laugh out loud, disagree, and get emotional. It was as if each meeting strengthened a forgotten part of herself. At one of these meetings, one of the women, Anna, a recently divorced woman with 2 teenage children, commented, "Some people think that grandmothers are only good for helping, but we get tired too, right?" Chloe smiled. She didn't need to say anything. Anna understood in her eyes. Little by little, she realized that she was not alone. In her story, that other women also carried guilt, burdens, and longing, that many of them were also relearning to put themselves in the center after years of orbiting around the needs of others. And that gave her strength, not as a ready-made speech, but as a silent recognition among equals. It was like finding shelter in a place that before seemed to be made up of nothing but emptiness. Have you ever had a similar situation to Chloe's? Tell us in the comments below. Your experience may help and inspire others too. One sunny Sunday, while she was organizing the porch to welcome the reading group home for the first time, Chloe noticed something strange. She was no longer arranging the space to impress anyone. She didn't worry about matching pillows or the antique china in the china cabinet. What mattered was welcoming them. She made fresh coffee, put on a soft playlist, and spread pots of aromatic herbs on the tables. When her friends arrived, they smelled basil and carrot cake. They laughed, hugged, and shared stories. At the end of the afternoon, one of them commented, "Your home smells like peace." Chloe just smiled, because now she knew that was exactly what it was. She had come back to live in herself, and it felt so good. Later, alone, she picked up the envelope with Lara's letter and reread it. The words were still the same, but what she felt when she read them had changed. There was no more pain, just a mature awareness that each person can only love as far as they can, and that sometimes love hurts unintentionally. She put the letter away again and sat down in front of her computer. She opened a new document and began typing an email to Evan. It wasn't long nor sentimental, just one line. "Whenever you want to come visit me with Simon, the door is open, but come slowly without rushing. I won't chase you anymore, but I'm still here." She sent it. She didn't wait for a reply. Instead, she put a kettle on the stove, took off her shoes, and lay down in the hammock. The sun was already beginning to set, and golden light flooded the room through the half-open window. It was late afternoon, but for Chloe, it was also the beginning of a new phase. Without chains, without obligations, just lightness, roots, and space to blossom. In the days that followed that email, Chloe continued to live her life as normal. She didn't anxiously check her inbox or dwell on whether she had been too harsh. She had done what she needed to do, in the most honest way she knew how. She started walking more, discovered a short trail near the park, and started going there twice a week, always with a small bottle of tea and a homemade snack. On one of those trips, she ran into a woman she had exchanged greetings with at the grocery store. They sat down together on a wooden bench and started talking. The woman, named Dolores, had a similar story. Too much giving, not enough recognition. And on that bench, with the trees providing shade and the wind gently blowing on her face, Chloe realized that the world was full of women like her, silent, strong, exhausted, and slowly being reborn. Dolores and Chloe became walking companions. Nothing too elaborate, just quiet get-togethers, exchanging recipes, laughing about knee pains, and even making plans to take a short trip in the fall. It was all simple but deeply nourishing. One day, as they shared an apple pie sitting in the square, Dolores said, "We've spent so much time being there for others that we've almost forgotten what it's like to be there for them, right?" Chloe nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. She didn't answer. She just took another bite of the pie and savored the flavor more carefully. She no longer needed grand gestures or promises. Those small, genuine moments were enough, not for lack of ambition, but for an abundance of awareness. After so much time trying to deserve the love of others, she now knew she deserved it simply by existing, and that, in itself, was the greatest gift she could have given herself. A few weeks later, as Chloe was sweeping the porch, she heard the intercom ring. It was the mailman, with a package addressed to her. She didn't recognize the sender at first, but when she opened the box, she found a small framed photo of Simon, now older, holding a child's drawing with the word "Grandma" written crookedly and lovingly. Beside it was a note. "He asked me to send it to you. He's starting to talk. Every time he sees your picture, he smiles." It was from Evan. Chloe felt her eyes fill with tears, but she didn't cry. The emotion was different now. It didn't come from a wound, but from a well-healed scar. She placed the frame on the bookshelf, next to a lavender candle and the box of letters she'd written to herself. Then she made herself some tea and sat down to write another letter, this time to the future. In the letter, she wrote about how she hoped Simon would grow up knowing that love doesn't have a single form, that sometimes loving someone also means walking away so as not to lose yourself. She hoped that he would become a kind man, that he would learn to respect other people's boundaries, and especially his own. Maybe one day when you're older, this letter will reach you. And even if it doesn't, I want you to know, Grandma never left. She just had to come home. She folded the paper carefully, put it in the box, and locked it with the key. Then she went to the window, looked at the orange clouds of the sunset, and smiled. It was good to think about the future without the weight of the past. It was good to wish without having to control. Chloe no longer wanted everything back. She wanted what came lightly, spontaneously, truly. And that, she knew, you don't ask for, you allow it. One of the following nights, while she was organizing her things for another pottery class, Chloe found an old, dusty picture frame in the back of a drawer. It was a picture of her and Evan as children in the backyard of their old house, the two of them smiling with their mouths full of paint after painting a wall together. The image made her smile, but it also brought a twinge of pain, no longer the kind that grips and consumes, but a longing that now knows where to live. She sat with the picture on her lap for a while, remembering the small joys, the nights she would make pancakes and tell made-up stories. She realized that her love for Evan had never diminished. It had just stopped expressing itself the way it used to. Now it was a love that knew how to protect itself. She put the photo in an envelope and wrote on the back, This part of us still exists. She didn't send it. She left it on her dresser as a reminder that there are memories that don't need to be given away to make sense. Then she went to class, where she began to shape a new piece of clay, a small, simple but firm bowl. As her hands molded the clay, she felt herself doing the same to herself. She was reshaping the contours of her own life, more gently and less hastily. At the end of the class, the teacher complimented her on the shape and said, "You have firm yet delicate hands." Chloe thanked her, looking at the piece as if it were more than an object. There was a reflection of herself, imperfect, useful, beautiful in her own way. And that night, before going to sleep, she understood something simple and powerful. It wasn't about going back to who she was before. It was about being someone new with the marks and lessons that have now become part of who she is. A short time later, Chloe received an unexpected invitation. A former co-worker, now living in another city, invited her to an art exhibit and a walk in the park. On impulse, she almost declined. She thought about the schedule of her pottery class, the maintenance of the house, the plants that needed water. But then she took a deep breath and said yes. She caught a train on Saturday morning and went. The exhibit was modest but touching. It portrayed ordinary women in intimate, real moments. Some were crying, others were smiling, some were just looking out the window. Chloe saw herself in almost all of them. She didn't need to read the descriptions because she felt them. It was as if someone had put on canvas what so many women like her carried in silence. When she left, she had an ice cream with her friend and they walked for hours, talking about life, absences, and new beginnings. On the way back, sitting next to the train window, Chloe felt a kind of serene joy. Not the explosive kind that doesn't last long, but one that settles in slowly, almost imperceptibly. She realized that life was different, and that she was different too. She was no longer the woman who had boarded the train months ago carrying cakes and expectations. She was different, lighter, more whole, more aware of what she deserved and what she would no longer accept. When she got home, she watered the plants, took off her shoes, and turned on the radio to a random station. An old song that she used to listen to with her husband was playing. Instead of sadness, she felt gratitude because he, with all his mistakes and successes, had always seen her. And maybe that was why it took her so long to realize when she stopped being seen. But now, finally, her eyes were meeting each other in the mirror with truth, and that was enough. A few days later, during a reading group meeting, Chloe was surprised by a dynamic proposed by one of the younger participants. Each woman had to share a letter or phrase she had written to herself. When it was her turn, Chloe hesitated. Her hand was shaking a little, but she opened her box of letters and chose one, written on a quiet afternoon, weeks before. She read it out loud. "You have spent your life trying to fit into places that were never meant for you. Now it's time to build yours. Even if it's small, let it be yours alone." The silence that followed was profound. Some women cried, others just nodded. There, among strangers who had become close through affection, Chloe felt welcomed once again, and she realized how much her journey, however personal it was, echoed in the stories of so many others. After the meeting, one of the women approached her. It was Marta, a widow for 2 years and the mother of 3 grown children. She took Chloe's hand and said, "You saved me today. I didn't know I could say no." Chloe squeezed her hand back, not as someone offering comfort, but as someone recognizing her own path reflected in the other. That night, when she returned home, she wrote in her notebook, "Maybe this is my place in the world," reminding myself and others that we can stop bleeding for those who don't even realize they've hurt us. It was the kind of truth that would have seemed bitter before, but now it felt liberating. The pain was still there, but it was accompanied by wisdom. Chloe no longer wanted a perfect life or answers for everything. She wanted an honest life, with room to make mistakes, to change her mind, and most importantly, to not have to erase herself in order to be loved. A few weeks later, Chloe received an invitation to a luncheon for her grandson's birthday. Simon would be turning 1, and for the first time since his hospitalization, Evan and Lara were extending a more concrete gesture of reconnection. The invitation came with a simple message: "We would love for you to be with us. No obligations, just presence." Chloe took 2 days to respond, not out of pride, but because she wanted to make sure that this move wouldn't take her back to where she was before. She thought about it a lot, revisited the letters she had written, talked to Dolores. Finally, she decided to accept, with one silent condition: she would go as a guest, not as a solution. On her birthday, she wore the olive green dress she had bought months before and brought a carefully chosen gift, an interactive storybook with fabrics, sounds, and smells. When she arrived, Evan greeted her with a long hug, the kind that says more than 1,000 words. Lara, visibly more restrained, also greeted her with respect. The house was full, with other children running around, colorful balloons, and a nice smell of vanilla cake in the air. Chloe was not pushed into the kitchen, not called to take care of diapers or serve the guests. She sat on the couch, held Simon in her lap for a few minutes, and told him quietly that life is made of choices. "And today," she whispered, "Grandma chose to be here because now she knows the difference between presence and wait." She stayed for 2 hours, chatted with some family friends, took photos, and before congratulating them, said goodbye. She left without drama, without having to explain herself, and as she walked through the door with the warm sun on her back, she felt something rare: pride in herself. That night, back home, Chloe went to bed early, not because she was tired, but because she wanted to savor the silence. A silence full of meaning that no longer hurt. She took out her notebook and wrote about the day. She didn't mention the decor or the flavors of lunch. She wrote about the feeling of being in the right place, in the right way, without having to shrink to fit in. "Maybe that's maturity," she wrote, "realizing that I can come and go without getting lost along the way." Then she closed the notebook, put on some soft instrumental music, and lit a candle. She allowed herself to fall asleep lightly, like someone who had finally let the past rest in peace, without resentment or unfinished business. In the following days, she returned to her routine: plants, reading, meetings with the group. Sometimes Evan would send short messages with videos of Simon babbling new words or trying to walk. Chloe would watch, smile, and respond when she felt like it. Nothing was automatic anymore, nor driven by guilt. Everything was a choice. One day, while she was taking care of the plants with Dolores, she talked about her birthday. It was good, simple, beautiful, but the best part was leaving when I wanted to. Dolores smiled, understanding. "That's rare, Chloe, knowing when to go." They continued watering the seedlings, and the conversation continued lightly, like the wind passing through the pots. There was no longer any rush, no need to prove anything to anyone. Chloe had discovered that living well was not about having everything in its place, but knowing when something or someone deserved to be in your space. And now, that space was sacred. One afternoon, while organizing her small bookshelf, Chloe found an old notebook she had used years ago to write down bills and receipts. She leafed through it curiously and found a list of monthly expenses dated from the time when she was still supporting part of Evan and Lara's life. She looked at the numbers with a mixture of astonishment and self-compassion. It wasn't about regret. She knew she had done what she thought was right at the time. But now, looking at it with different eyes, she could see how much she had neglected to take care of herself in order to keep others afloat. She closed the notebook, put it in a box with other old objects, and decided to donate most of them. She no longer needed to carry around papers that told stories of a version of herself that no longer existed. That same week, the reading group's theme was "Things We Give Up to Live Better." Each woman brought an object or symbol that represented something they had left behind, Chloe brought a small, half-empty bottle of perfume that she used to use whenever she visited her son's house. I would put it on before I arrived, as if the scent would give me more courage or make my presence lighter, she said. But I realized that presence doesn't need to be disguised. If I'm not welcome as I am, I might as well not go. The other women applauded her silently, their eyes shining. It was a simple but powerful moment. At the end of the meeting, they left. All the objects in a box, which would be donated. Chloe looked at the bottle one last time before dropping it inside. In doing so, she felt as if she had finally given back to the world a part of herself that she no longer needed to carry. One Sunday, while walking through the park where she and Dolores used to walk, Chloe saw a young mother sitting alone on a bench, trying to calm a crying baby. The woman looked exhausted, her eyes sunken and her shoulders slumped, as if she were carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. On impulse, Chloe slowly approached and asked, "Do you want me to hold him for a minute so you can breathe?" The woman nodded, relieved, and gratefully handed the baby to her. Chloe rocked him gently, softly, singing a song she used to sing to Evan when he was little. The baby stopped crying. The young mother smiled, her eyes brimming with tears. "Thank you. I didn't know I needed it so much." Chloe simply said, "We always need a little cuddle, even when we pretend we can handle it." That night, Chloe wrote another letter to herself. It wasn't about Evan or Simon or old pains. It was about the present, about how being whole didn't mean isolating yourself, but knowing what to give and what to preserve. Today, I held someone, and I was held, without erasing myself, without losing myself. She folded the letter and put it away. She was creating a new set of memories, not the ones that came from a place of struggle or pain, but the ones that were born of balance, the kind of memories that over time warmed her, not weighed her down. In that moment, Chloe knew something that had been growing inside her for months. She didn't need the world to see her in order to exist with strength. It was enough for her to see herself with clarity, respect, and tenderness, and that was exactly what she was doing, day after day, choice after choice, slowly but surely. One rainy afternoon, while organizing the kitchen cabinets, Chloe received a new message from Evan. It was short but sincere. "I'm learning to be a better person. Thank you for showing me what boundaries mean with love." She read it more than once. For the first time, she didn't feel that old urge to respond quickly or the need to turn the conversation into something deep. She just smiled, still holding the phone, and whispered to herself, "He's growing up, not just as a father, but as a man." And that, she knew, wasn't just her doing. It was a reflection of the courage she had had to say enough when it hurt the most. It wasn't easy to walk away. It was even harder to stay firm after making the decision. But now, seeing the subtle fruits of that gesture, she felt validated. That night, as the rain fell rhythmically on the roof, Chloe lit a candle and allowed herself a moment of contemplation. She thought about all the versions of herself she had to be, the mother who had gone above and beyond, the woman who had kept quiet, the grandmother who had tried to love even though she had no space, and now this woman who calmly chose what and who to let in. It wasn't a straight line, and it wasn't always easy, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. She took out her notebook and wrote, "I wasn't made to carry the world. I was made to inhabit mine." It was a simple sentence, but it closed a cycle. She knew there would still be days of doubt, of longing, even of relapse. But now, with all the letters written, the boundaries drawn, and her heart back in her chest, Chloe felt that she had finally stopped being a supporting character in her own life, and she had no intention of stepping out of the lead role. The following week, during a pottery class, the teacher suggested that each student create a piece inspired by something they wanted to keep close to them. Chloe thought long and hard before starting. In the end, she molded a small sculpture in the shape of a half-open door. "That's what I want," she explained. "Spaces that open up, but don't open wide. People who come in, but don't invade." The teacher looked at her tenderly and said that this was perhaps the most honest definition of maturity she had ever heard. Chloe smiled, but she knew it came from a place of pain and clarity. She had spent so much time trying to keep everything open, her heart, her house, her wallet, that she now understood the value of having control over her own keys. Back home, she placed the sculpture on the bookshelf between the poetry books and the letter. A box. Sometimes she would just look at it and remember she could open it, close it, and even leave it ajar. But it was up to her to decide. And at that pace, Chloe began to build lighter days. She also began to dedicate herself to writing short stories, inspired by the conversations in the reading group. A friend took them to a small publisher, and within a few months, Chloe had a little book published with the title Coisas que degresso ao mundo, Things I Have Given Back to the World. It was a local success, not in sales but in connection. People identified with her, wrote letters, left notes on her gate, and that moved her, not out of vanity, but because she now saw meaning in it all. Her story, previously told with shame or silence, now served as a mirror for other women to recognize themselves. And in that reflection, she saw herself too, whole, real, and finally at peace. It was at one of these literary events that Chloe, with her hair now whiter and the serene demeanor of someone who knows her best, was approached by a young woman named Leticia. "My mother read your book and gave it to me as a gift. She said it was so I could learn not to lose myself, trying to be everything to others." Chloe listened in silence, feeling the words like small seeds thrown into the wind. She thanked her, offered a hug, and after Leticia left, she sat alone on a bench in the square. She looked around, families, couples, children running around, and for the first time, she didn't feel like something was missing. She was complete, even if she had wounds, because now her pain had a name, a story, and a purpose. It was part of a path, not a burden to hide. That night, lying in bed, she reflected on everything she had experienced since that phone call from Evan months ago. She thought about the uncomfortable couch, the mosquitoes, the veiled humiliation, but also about the moments with Simon, the strength she had gained in setting boundaries, and everything that came after. She understood that the real turning point was not the moment she left, but the moment she decided to never again let anyone treat her as invisible. This commitment to herself was now the thread that ran through her every day. And, curiously, what brought her the most joy was knowing that she no longer needed to fight to keep anyone close. Whoever stayed would stay by mutual choice. And that was enough. She went to sleep with a slight smile, feeling that even if tomorrow brought new challenges, she already had everything she needed to face them. The following month, Evan showed up unexpectedly on a rainy afternoon, holding Simon by the hand. The boy was already walking, and when he saw Chloe, he opened his arms in an impulse she would never forget. Evan didn't say much. He just handed her an envelope with some drawings Simon had made and a calmly written letter. "I don't want to ask you for anything. I just wanted to see you and show you that I'm trying to do better." Chloe invited them in, offered them tea and cookies. They spent a quiet afternoon, not talking about the past, just observing the present. Simon ran around the room, laughed with an old toy Chloe had kept, and when they said goodbye, he gave his grandmother a kiss on the cheek, one of those wet, clumsy and true kisses. She hugged him without promising when they would see each other again, but with a light heart. After they left, Chloe sat in the hammock and watched the light rain hitting the leaves. In the garden, there, in that simple moment, she understood once and for all that forgiveness doesn't need to be shouted or confirmed with grand gestures. Sometimes it happens in silence, in looks, in respected spaces. And that starting over doesn't mean erasing what happened, but learning to walk over it firmly, without repeating the same steps. The next day, she returned to her routine with the same calm as always. Ceramics class, afternoon tea, meetings with friends. But now, with a different feeling, that of having ended a cycle with dignity, of having come back to herself without closing herself off from the world, of having chosen, day after day, the path that hurt less, not because it was easier, but because it was the right one for her. And that, she knew, was freedom. Chloe still writes letters from time to time, not as many as before, but whenever she needs to remember who she is. She keeps them all in the same little wooden box, now with a new note glued to the lid. It says, "Here lives everything that made me come back to myself." Because that's exactly what happened. And even if no one ever reads all those words, she knows. She wrote the most important story of her life. And finally, she was the protagonist of it. If this story touched you in any way, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story.